You got all those books, the Bible, you've got the different gospels and stuff that people are quite familiar with. Half the time, they didn't even need to read the subtitles. They could look at it and know what was going on.
It was meant to be just another film, but what happened on the set of The Passion of the Christ defied every rule of Hollywood. Lightning struck, lives changed, and even skeptics whispered that something greater was at work. 2 decades later, Mel Gibson finally admits it. Some moments can't be explained. Even the entire film crew can't. This is the story of the miracles, mysteries, and power that still surround the film today. To this day, no one can explain it. When Mel Gibson set out to make The Passion of the Christ, he didn't expect miracles. He expected rejection, controversy, maybe even failure, but not the kind of moments that made cast and crew question what was real. From the start, something about this film felt different. The production wasn't just a movie shoot. It was a spiritual battlefield wrapped in a cinematic masterpiece. The project was already a long shot. A brutal, biblical drama spoken entirely in Aramaic, Latin, and Hebrew. No studio wanted to touch it. Gibson financed it himself, betting his career, reputation, and fortune. But he felt driven, almost haunted, by what he called a divine nudge to tell Christ's story as it truly happened. That conviction would come to define every moment of filming and perhaps explain the unexplainable things that followed. One of the most well-known miracles came during the filming of the crucifixion scene. Jim Caviezel, who played Jesus, was struck by lightning while hanging on the cross. Eyewitnesses recall a flash of light, a sudden blast, and then silence. Caviezel was thrown off his feet, but survived, remarkably uninjured. Moments later, assistant director John Michelini was also hit by lightning in the same area, twice. No one could believe it. They were filming the most sacred moment of the story, and the heavens literally sparked above them. Gibson later said that the crew felt an electric presence, awe mixed with fear, and many dropped to their knees. The odds of anyone being struck by lightning twice on the same set were beyond calculation. It wasn't coincidence, Caviezel said later. You could feel it. There was power in the air. That wasn't the only strange event. Caviezel dislocated his shoulder while carrying the 150-pound cross, mirroring the agony his character endured. He suffered hypothermia, pneumonia, and accidental lashes that tore into his back during the scourging scenes. Yet, he refused to stop filming. I felt like I wasn't supposed to quit, he recalled. I felt I was meant to experience that pain, not just act it. The crew began to notice a pattern. Every setback turned into something profound on screen. When weather destroyed a set, the resulting lighting created the most beautiful shot of the day. When an actor fell ill, a new performer stepped in and delivered a scene that felt divinely inspired. Even Gibson, known for his toughness, said later, "You can't explain some of what happened. It's as if we weren't the ones directing it." Around the halfway point of production, people began to whisper that the film had taken on a life of its own. Crew members who hadn't set foot in a church for decades found themselves praying between takes. A cameraman reportedly converted after witnessing Caviezel's performance up close. Extras who came in skeptical left in tears. Gibson didn't advertise these stories. In fact, he warned people not to dramatize them. "This isn't about publicity," he said. "If there's something happening here, it's not us, it's him." There were also unexplainable coincidences. The location in Matera, Italy, where much of the film was shot, experienced an unusual calm during production. Storms would appear to gather, only to part right before critical scenes were filmed. In one instance, the skies cleared just as Caviezel began the Sermon on the Mount. When the camera rolled, a beam of sunlight fell perfectly across his face. The cinematographer, a veteran of dozens of films, said quietly afterward, "That wasn't planned." Even Gibson's own life mirrored the script he was directing. He later confessed that he was battling personal demons during that time: doubt, exhaustion, and spiritual restlessness. "I felt tested," he admitted. Everything that could go wrong went wrong, but somehow every day ended with something good. He called it a film shot through grace. Behind the scenes, something else was happening. Forgiveness. Crew members who had clashed began reconciling. People prayed together before shoots. Many felt that the project had become a collective act of worship. Caviezel summed it up simply. It stopped being a movie halfway through. It became an experience. When filming finally wrapped, the miracles didn't fade. They followed people home. Some crew members later reported changes in their lives. Addictions broken, relationships restored, and renewed faith. Churches across Italy began screening behind-the-scenes footage during sermons. Even skeptics couldn't deny that the atmosphere around the production had been unusually charged. Years later, Gibson would look back on it with awe rather than explanation. "You can't make that stuff up," he told an interviewer. "To this day, no one can explain it. It just happened." In Hollywood, where every light, sound, and camera movement is meticulously planned, the Passion of the Christ stood as an anomaly, something guided by forces beyond the lens. It wasn't just the story of Christ that felt sacred, but the act of telling it. Those who were there still describe it the same way: humbling, haunting, holy. Gibson often says that the movie changed him more than he expected. It stripped away pride and replaced it with something quieter, a sense of surrender. "I was directing," he said, "but I wasn't in charge." The miracles that shaped the Passion of the Christ didn't end on set. They multiplied across the world, turning audiences into believers and a film into a global phenomenon. The power and reach of the Passion. When The Passion of the Christ hit theaters in 2004, no one, not even Mel Gibson, could have predicted what would happen next. It was a film spoken in dead languages, told through violence and silence, and directed by a man Hollywood had largely written off. Yet somehow, this small, self-financed project became one of the most powerful cultural events of the century. Churches bought out theaters. Families who hadn't prayed together in years gathered in lines that wrapped around city blocks. In small towns and megacities alike, audiences sat stunned, many weeping as the credits rolled. Something had shifted, not just in entertainment, but in the way millions of people reconnected with faith. The film's emotional pull wasn't subtle. Gibson didn't sugarcoat the story. He showed suffering in raw, unflinching detail, but that's what made it feel real. For many, it was the first time they had felt the crucifixion, not just read about it. The agony on screen wasn't just physical, it was deeply human. That's why people cried, prayed, and, in many cases, changed. In the Philippines, processions were organized in honor of the film's release. In South America, local priests used it as a tool for teaching. Across Europe, it sparked debates about faith in public life. And in America, it became a national conversation, one that cut through political, cultural, and generational lines. Gibson had done what few filmmakers ever could. He made a mainstream audience confront the sacred. Critics were divided. Some called it manipulative or extreme, while others praised its emotional power. But audiences didn't care. They felt something authentic, something that bypassed intellect and hit the heart. The film earned over $600 million worldwide, a staggering number for a religious film, especially one without a major studio behind it. For comparison, it made more than The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King in certain regions, a phenomenon no one could logically explain. By mid-2004, it was clear that The Passion of the Christ wasn't just a film, it had become a movement. Viewers wrote letters describing profound experiences, reconciliations, conversions, spiritual awakenings. In some cases, people claimed miraculous healings after watching it. Others described it as if the screen itself became a kind of altar. In countries like South Korea and Brazil, theaters stayed packed for months. In Africa, missionaries screened it outdoors for communities who had never seen a movie before. The images transcended culture and language. You didn't need subtitles to understand pain, mercy, or sacrifice. The ripple reached beyond believers. Even atheists and secular critics admitted that the film carried a strange weight. Roger Ebert, not known for sentimentality, called it the most violent film I have ever seen, and one of the most moving. Others said it was an experience, not just a story. Meanwhile, Christian leaders across denominations, Catholic, Protestant, Orthodox, praised its unifying effect. For a brief moment, it felt like faith had found common ground through art. Bible study groups exploded in size. Youth ministries used clips for reflection. Pastors reported record attendance on Easter Sunday. The movie also opened doors for faith-based filmmaking that hadn't existed in decades. Studios suddenly saw that there was a massive, untapped audience hungry for stories that spoke to belief. Without the passion, there might never have been Heaven is for Real, God's Not Dead, or The Chosen. Gibson had reminded Hollywood of something simple. Faith sells, but only when it's sincere. Yet what made the film's power so unusual was how personal it felt. Every viewer saw something different. For some, it was guilt. For others, healing. Many said they left theaters in silence, unable to speak, as if words couldn't hold what they'd seen. Even Mel Gibson himself seemed astonished. In interviews, he avoided taking credit. "It's not my film," he said repeatedly. "It belongs to something bigger." He once told a journalist that while editing the movie, he would sometimes feel a presence in the room. Whether that was emotion, exhaustion, or something divine, he never tried to define it. "You just know when something's not entirely yours," he said. What's perhaps most extraordinary is how the film continues to resonate decades later. Schools, churches, and prayer groups still revisit it every Lent. Its imagery has become modern iconography: the dirt, the blood, the broken crown of thorns. For many, Caviezel's portrayal of Jesus has become the definitive visual reference. The movie's global reach even extended into unexpected places. In Muslim-majority countries, bootleg copies circulated underground, and some Islamic scholars praised its reverence and moral message. In Israel, Jewish audiences debated its historical portrayal. In Africa, new Christian communities were founded by people who had seen the film projected in village squares. More than a motion picture, the passion became a bridge, connecting faiths, cultures, and generations through the universal language of sacrifice. The film didn't preach doctrine, it simply showed devotion, and that honesty struck a chord the world hadn't heard in decades. To this day, whenever it airs, audiences respond with the same awe. The emotion hasn't dulled. Perhaps it's because the story it tells, one of love, forgiveness, and redemption through suffering, is timeless. Every generation finds its own meaning in it. For many, The Passion of the Christ remains more than a movie. It's a reminder that cinema can still move the soul, that storytelling, when done with conviction, can become a form of prayer. But to understand why The Passion existed in the first place, why Mel Gibson risked everything to make it, you have to look at the man himself and the spiritual journey that drove him to tell this story. Gibson's calling and conversion. Long before The Passion of the Christ became a global phenomenon, Mel Gibson was already a household name, a leading man with box office magnetism and a reputation for walking the edge between charm and chaos. But behind the fame, the money, and the headlines, something in him was breaking down. His heroes was quietly battling his own demons. He had everything: fame, fortune, Oscars from Braveheart, yet felt hollow. In interviews years later, Gibson admitted that during those years, he flirted with self-destruction. "I was in a dark place," he once said. "I didn't want to live anymore." He'd been drinking heavily. His relationships were strained, and his faith, once strong in his Catholic upbringing, had drifted into the background. Then something happened. Gibson described it as a nudge from somewhere. In moments of despair, he began praying again, not out of ritual, but desperation. Slowly, faith became his lifeline. He found himself revisiting the Gospels, drawn especially to the final hours of Jesus' life. The suffering, the silence, the forgiveness, it all mirrored what he felt inside. That's when the idea came, to make a film not about victory or glory, but about pain, redemption, and sacrifice. But it wasn't just any film he had in mind. He wanted to tell the story as raw and authentic as possible. No Hollywood polish, no English dialogue, no filters. It would be spoken entirely in Aramaic and Latin, with every scene stripped of comfort. For Gibson, this wasn't about entertainment. It was penance. When he began sharing the idea, studios laughed. Executives told him, "It'll never sell." Some even warned that it could ruin his career. But Gibson didn't care. He sold part of his own land, poured in nearly $30 million of his personal fortune, and founded a company just to produce it. He wasn't chasing box office numbers, he was chasing meaning. Every time I'd lose hope, Gibson recalled, something would happen. A door would open, a person would appear, a problem would disappear. It was like something was pushing me forward. He wrote and rewrote the script countless times, working with Benedict Fitzgerald, digging deep into theology, and consulting priests, rabbis, and historians. It became an obsession, but also a form of healing. The more he worked, the more he felt himself changing. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here was a man known for portraying warriors and rebels, William Wallace, Martin Riggs, now devoting himself to the story of the ultimate act of surrender. The transformation wasn't just creative, it was spiritual. Those close to Gibson say, the passion saved him as much as it inspired others later. During filming, he would attend daily mass, pray with the cast, and often walk off set in tears. Jim Caviezel, who played Jesus, said in interviews that Gibson was haunted by grace, a man trying to make peace with his past through art. Every detail of the film reflected Gibson's rebirth. He wanted the camera to stay close, intimate, and uncomfortable, to make viewers feel they were witnessing something sacred. The brutality wasn't meant for shock, it was meant for empathy. "We've sanitized faith," Gibson said. "I wanted people to feel the cost of love." As production went on, strange moments began happening, what many now call miracles. A man on set who was struck by lightning survived without harm. Another crew member who had been battling illness recovered unexpectedly. Even Caviezel was reportedly hit by lightning once during filming and walked away shaken but alive. For Gibson, these weren't coincidences. There was a presence on that set, he said later. You could feel it. Gibson himself experienced moments of what he called divine reassurance, instances where something would go wrong and then resolve in ways he couldn't explain. Equipment failures would fix themselves. Weather would clear seconds before crucial takes. You don't plan that, he said. You just recognize it. But even with those signs, Gibson's journey wasn't easy. He faced enormous pressure, public criticism, and doubt from nearly every corner of the industry. He knew people would call him extreme, maybe even crazy. Yet he pressed on because for him, the passion wasn't a career move. It was an act of surrender to a higher calling. In his own words, "I didn't choose this film. It chose me." When The Passion was finally released, Gibson wasn't just a filmmaker anymore. He was a man reborn. He spoke openly about faith, repentance, and the importance of grace. He built a private chapel on his property, attended Mass daily, and became more vocal about his spiritual life. Friends noticed the change immediately. The man who used to avoid serious conversations about religion was suddenly quoting scripture and talking about forgiveness. Even his relationship with his family improved. He told one interviewer, "I realized that faith isn't a crutch, it's armor." Of course, Gibson's road after The Passion wasn't perfect. He still faced public controversies and personal setbacks in the years that followed. But even through the chaos, the film remained his spiritual anchor, a project that reminded him of who he wanted to be. Today, when asked if he would ever make another religious film, Gibson doesn't hesitate. He's already at work on a sequel titled The Resurrection, which he promises will explore what happened in the unseen realm between death and life. It's the continuation of the story that changed his life, and possibly his soul. For Gibson, the Passion was never just about Jesus' suffering. It was about his own redemption. The same story he once told on screen continues to play out quietly in his heart. While Gibson's faith journey gave birth to something extraordinary, Hollywood wasn't exactly welcoming it with open arms. What happened next revealed just how divided the industry was when it came to stories about God, faith, and miracles. Hollywood and the sacred divide. For decades, Hollywood had treated religion like a delicate prop, something to reference, but rarely to revere. It was fine for biblical epics of the past, when spectacle mattered more than spirituality, but in the modern industry, faith was risky business. The studios loved stories about superheroes and saviors, just not the savior. And when Mel Gibson brought them The Passion of the Christ, many thought he'd lost his mind. At first, major studios wouldn't even take meetings about the project. Executives said audiences wouldn't sit through a movie in Aramaic and Latin. Others warned it would offend too many groups, that it was too violent, too Catholic, too politically charged. In short, too much. So Gibson did what few in his position dared. He went independent. He poured in his own money, formed Icon Productions, and quietly began assembling a team outside the Hollywood system. This alone was unheard of. Big stars and studio giants were supposed to play by the rules. But Gibson wasn't interested in approval. He was chasing truth. Ironically, this rejection by Hollywood only strengthened his resolve. When every door closed, Gibson said later, I realized I was supposed to walk a different road. And that road was steep. Distribution was nearly impossible. No one wanted to touch it. Critics who heard about the film in advance were already sharpening their pens. Gibson found himself an outsider in an industry he'd once dominated. Still, as word spread through faith-based circles, grassroots support exploded. Churches organized screenings. Pastors preached about it. Audiences who hadn't gone to theaters in years were lining up for tickets. Hollywood was baffled. The system they'd dismissed as too niche suddenly became one of the most profitable movements in modern film. What scared the industry most wasn't just the film's success. It was the realization that a story told outside their system could reshape the cultural conversation. The Passion of the Christ didn't just sell tickets. It challenged Hollywood's monopoly on storytelling. Even more unsettling was the emotional reaction it provoked. Viewers were crying, praying, confessing, sometimes walking out in silence. Theater owners reported audiences sitting through the credits, unable to move. This wasn't just entertainment, it was an encounter. Gibson had managed to do what few directors ever achieved: create a film that felt less like a movie and more like an experience. And that terrified Hollywood. If faith-driven films could connect this deeply, what did that mean for an industry built on fiction and fantasy? Halfway through its run, The Passion was already breaking box office records, yet some media outlets seemed determined to downplay it. There were debates about its violence, its theology, even its intentions. Gibson, meanwhile, kept his focus on the purpose behind it. This film wasn't meant to convert anyone, he said. It was meant to remind us. Hollywood couldn't explain what audiences felt. Behind closed doors, executives began rethinking their stance. Studios that once rejected the script started developing their own religious-themed projects, hoping to capture a fraction of the Passion's magic. But none quite succeeded because Gibson's film had something they couldn't replicate: conviction. To Gibson, that was the entire point. Movies have souls, he once said, and if the person making it doesn't believe in what he's saying, neither will the audience. That line summed up why The Passion stood apart. It wasn't polished to fit trends or formulas. It was raw, imperfect, and utterly sincere. And audiences, even those who weren't religious, recognized that honesty. Hollywood, however, remained divided. Some praised Gibson's courage. Others condemned him for crossing lines of taste, theology, and political correctness. A few admired his independence but feared the precedent it set. What if more filmmakers bypassed the system altogether? By now, Gibson had made peace with the divide. He didn't expect the industry to embrace him again. "I wasn't looking for permission," he told one interviewer. "I was looking for purpose." In time, the shock subsided, but the tension never really faded. The passion opened the door for modern faith-based films, from God's Not Dead to Heaven is for Real. But Hollywood's relationship with spirituality remains uneasy. The same questions linger. How do you film belief? How do you measure faith? And can a movie truly move the soul? Gibson never claimed to have the answers. He only knew that the moment you try to explain a miracle, it stops being one. And as the world continued to debate the meaning behind his masterpiece, Gibson faced the ultimate test: how to handle the wave of backlash, controversy, and praise that followed, all at once. Both backlash and unshakable success. When The Passion of the Christ finally hit theaters in 2004, few could have predicted the storm that followed. What started as a small, self-financed project by a defiant Mel Gibson erupted into one of the most talked-about films in modern history. Part cinematic revelation, part cultural lightning rod. Every headline, every sermon, every dinner-table conversation seemed to orbit the same question: what just happened? The controversy ignited even before the premiere. Religious groups debated its theology. Critics called it too violent, too literal, too unrelenting. Some accused it of being anti-Semitic, others of glorifying suffering. Gibson suddenly found himself at the center of an ideological firestorm. Major newspapers printed scathing reviews, labeling it brutal, divisive, even dangerous. And yet, while critics tore it apart, audiences were doing the opposite. They were flocking to see it. Lines stretched around blocks, churches rented entire theaters, and word of mouth turned the film into a global phenomenon. Within weeks, The Passion shattered records, earning over $600 million worldwide on a budget of roughly $30 million. It became the highest-grossing R-rated film at the time and still ranks among the most successful independent films ever made. But success didn't quiet the noise, it amplified it. People couldn't decide whether The Passion was a miracle or a mistake. For every person who walked out shaken to tears, another left furious or confused. The debate wasn't just about religion. It was about what art should dare to show. For Gibson, the criticism was both painful and clarifying. He admitted later that he expected resistance, but not the scale of it. "I knew it would ruffle feathers," he said, "but I didn't expect it to hit nerves that deep." Still, he refused to apologize for the film's intensity. "If you can't face the darkness," he argued, "you'll never understand the light." Despite the uproar, the movie's influence was undeniable. Churches began using clips during sermons. People reported spiritual awakenings after watching it. Many viewers claimed it reignited their faith or made them revisit their beliefs. Even some non-Christians said it changed their perspective on the story of Jesus. Whether one loved or hated it, few left unaffected. The backlash that tried to bury The Passion ended up fueling its legacy. The louder its critics shouted, the more curious the public became. Gibson, for his part, let the results speak for themselves. "It's not mine anymore," he said quietly after the film's success. "It belongs to the people." And those people, millions across the world, kept watching, discussing, and debating it long after the credits rolled. The film became a cultural mirror, reflecting humanity's discomfort with suffering and redemption. Some saw it as faith renewed. Others saw it as fanaticism. But no one could deny its impact. Even Hollywood, initially skeptical, began to acknowledge the film's power. Executives who once rejected Gibson's pitch were suddenly trying to understand how a foreign-language religious drama could outperform their biggest blockbusters. The answer wasn't in marketing or production, it was in authenticity. Audiences had felt something real. Of course, the years that followed weren't easy for Gibson. Personal controversies and public struggles nearly derailed his career, casting long shadows over his achievements. Yet, the passion remained untouched, a singular piece of art that stood on its own, separate from his flaws. It was as if the film itself existed beyond its maker, carrying a message bigger than any scandal could undo. Today, more than 2 decades later, The Passion of the Christ is still studied, revisited, and remembered. It paved the way for a resurgence of faith-based filmmaking, inspired countless artists, and challenged Hollywood's notion of what audiences were ready to see. But perhaps the most striking part is this: the miracles never stopped. Cast members continued to speak of unexplainable moments, healings, conversions, coincidences that followed them long after production ended. Gibson himself has said he still receives letters from viewers describing transformations they can't explain. It's like the movie had its own life, he reflected. To this day, no one can explain it. That single line, half confession, half wonder, summarizes what made The Passion more than just a film. It was a spiritual event disguised as cinema, something that blurred the line between art and faith, between creation and creator. And maybe that's the point. Some stories aren't meant to be analyzed. They're meant to be felt. 2 decades later, the man who risked his career for a vision still stands by it, unchanged, unshaken, and still in awe. Because sometimes, as Mel Gibson admits, the greatest miracles aren't seen on screen. They happen behind it. And sometimes you can't just explain it. Subscribe for more powerful stories that reveal the unseen side of Hollywood's most unexplainable moments.